You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guest about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. One of the things that makes the customer experience community wonderful is the almost universal openness to connecting and sharing ideas. LinkedIn provides, as you'd expect, a wonderful pathway to explore the CX world. That's how I came to meet today's CX Passport guest, Damian Miller. We swapped a few comments and ideas on a LinkedIn post a while back and decided to carry it further into a conversation. So with a few clicks and comments, I get the chance to expand my global perspective with another fantastic CX practitioner in the UK. It was clear that Damian had a deep desire to focus on the human in CX and a global perspective. You know, that's music to this podcaster's ears. It's going to be a fun ride with Damian today. Damian, welcome to CX Passport.
Hey, Rick. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it, or as I've come to learn the English say, I'm chuffed about it.
Oh,
so
nice.
I've learned myself a new slang. But let's start off with human CX. You know, there's so much energy, and rightfully so during the pandemic, has been focused on digital transformation. It's required. No beef about that. But there is a risk of losing the humanity when we do that. So how do you keep the human at the center of CX?
I think that's a great question. I think, as you said, there's been a lot of change towards a digital transformation, and that's been absolutely necessary. And I don't think that that has to be at the expense of kind of the human side of customer experience. I mean, you have to make sure that it is baked into your culture. And I think today we're going to talk a little bit about culture in a number of different ways, but you have to have people at the heart of your decision making. Mm-hmm. And I think that is about making sure that whatever decisions are made throughout your business, people, whether that's your customer who you want to sell to, or right, your people who are going to do that job for you, are really bought into your kind of customer strategy and your ethos and the values that you show. And I think too often they're kind of forgotten. And people have, in the pace that was required to make change, have maybe forgotten the human-centered design of what they were doing. And it's not that I don't like technology. I think technology can be a fantastic enabler and can enhance the customer experience. But as long as it has that customer thought process going into, is this going to benefit the customer or not?
Yeah, and that's so true. And I've had my experiences with that. And the simplest one to describe, right, is I think a lot of us actually like bots when it comes to a particularly simple transaction. I need to know a very simple piece of information that I ask the bot responds. But what I've seen sometimes is that bot, and there's a comical example that I shared on LinkedIn a while back, but where that bot provides language back that is clearly not the most human oriented, or almost, there was one that had a bit of a snark to it. And it was clearly an unintentional snark, but how language has such an important piece of that. Have you, kind of tell me a little bit, so as you've had conversations with companies and have been talking to them about keeping that humanity in it, what are some of the ways that you've helped them make sure that the human stays at that center?
I think particularly if you are going to have interactions with customers, is about, as you said, making it feel like you're one human to another human, no matter what that is. And that's a large part about understanding the emotional connections that you're making with customers, however you're doing it. It's about making sure that empathy is a big part of your kind of way. You have language, you have understanding, you have all the markers that somebody would say, I had a really good experience there. And it doesn't matter then whether that's, as you say, a simple explanation that a bot can give you. And I have seen some studies that have shown, people couldn't pick them out of a lineup of human and non-human on very simple kind of FAQ type answers to things. I think the challenge is when you have a customer who is in distress or is in some form of something has gone wrong, it doesn't feel like the quickest, simplest, and most customer-focused way to have to go through that journey first. So I think when people can understand what is the journey the customer is on and the different points of that, and then what is the best approach to humanize that and have that kind of empathy and emotional connection on display.
Definitely hearing that empathy come through. I think that's incredibly vital and a key to the humanity there, certainly. So, Damian, I know that your experience includes large global companies. but now you focus on that smaller startup set. I think of those as having this incredible chance to get things right from the beginning. So what have you learned from the bigs that help you advise the startup, the smaller set?
I think you started that with a perfect point there. It's about the opportunity to get that culture we spoke about right. And in the center of the business. I know we talk a lot about customer centricity, but to sort of bring that to life, I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen in those big legacy businesses that weren't set up maybe with the customer in mind in quite the same way as you would today is how do you break down the silos? How do you get everybody's buy-in on different departments about what is important from a customer experience perspective? Everybody play their part in that as well, and that it's all about there's a clear kind of set of values around a customer. There's a clear strategy around how are we going to win new customers or grow loyalty, or how are we going to improve experiences, and everybody's kind of linked into that. I think that's a really big one. I mean, there are lots and lots of others as well, some of which I think we're going to touch on a little bit more, because I think don't try to chase a score is another one. Why are you doing this? What is your reason for wanting to improve customer experiences? If it's genuinely we want to be the best at this, we believe there is a competitive advantage to being the best at offering not only great products and services, but in a way that people want to experience that. And it's all of those things. And I would say that a lot of the smaller businesses don't have big budgets to set up customer programs or big listening programs, but they could really do with the help. And in some cases, it's just coaching the senior people through saying, a lot of this, it's in your head, but no one else knows this in your business.
Right.
So let's get it down on paper. Let's think about the whole customer journey from start to finish, how your teams are going to, as you expand and grow, how do you expect them to kind of take that on, that challenge of always being the best at offering great customer experiences? And how do you make sure that as you grow, you don't have to be in charge of everything, because you can't be. You cannot be everywhere, but you want your values and your ethos to sing and be everywhere.
I like what you're saying there. One, about pouring the foundation, right? That's sort of a very clear, right? So get that right. But there was something you said in there, and I don't have the exact words in my mind right now, but it was this idea of, the company is smaller, so you're there closer, and you're able to work with. Let me insert my words here, because it's work with the front line, and so you're actually at the smaller stage is the closest you'll ever be to your customer. So setting up not only the foundation of the culture you're describing, but setting up even the willingness and the processes and the approach. Let's say approach instead of process. The approach to make sure you're always listening to that front line as you grow and get further and further away from the actual customer, having those tools in place.
Yeah, I mean, I had a really good example of this the other day, if it's okay for me to talk about it. I was talking to somebody who owns a shop, and it's a sort of local store, but they want to open up to 8 or 10 more of them. And the challenge to me was, well, how can something like what you're talking about help me? How can your customer experience kind of consultancy coaching help me? And so we sat down, had a very open conversation. Guy's got lots of ideas, lots of knowledge, been working in the retail business for a long time. Again, he's had small and large businesses. But when we started talking about, once you span that control, how are you going to make sure you keep the standards you've built? Right. How are you going to make sure that you keep customers feeling that they're part of a community, which is a big deal for them? And suddenly realized, actually, I do know all of these, but I haven't yet managed to get that out. So it is that element of saying to somebody, you know this, you've got this, but you need to understand how to make this work as you grow.
Something, absolutely. And something you said when you were describing the bigs and the smalls, and, as you get to the bigs, you've got the silos and that sort of stuff. And I was thinking, company, when they're at the small stage, when you're talking about discussion of roles and ownership and functions, it's just get things done. Who's up? Who can do this? Doesn't matter what your title, your role is, you're just getting things done. And that is something fun at that stage of a company. But I imagine as they season, as they grow a bit, that question of, well, Damian, who should own CX comes up in discussions with you. And I can imagine that generates some fascinating conversation. Tell me more about that. Oh boy, there's a start.
I've gotten myself into a few interesting conversations and debates about this one across the internet, but also face-to-face with clients as well. I think one of the things for me, I think the word ownership it's a completely semantic language thing. I think it gets us into trouble.
Mm.
Because I think it's sort of customer experience in some ways has got to be a sort of living, breathing entity within a business. So someone has to be accountable for it. And I think that has to be someone who can lead the way, who can get the values and the culture in place. It might not even be one person. It might be a small group of people. I'm always wary of leading by committee. But people who can have the influence over those silos and over those departments. Someone who can make sure that the communication through the whole business is engaging everybody in the customer strategy. And I think it's about then making sure everybody has some responsibility for their part to play in it. So I think you took accountability and responsibility. I think you can't have everyone own it. That just gets confusing.
Right.
You need someone to lead the way. And hopefully that is, an inspiring and motivating person, but someone that everyone believes in as well.
Right.
They believe that customer experience is important, that it's not a tick in a box and it's not a fad. Actually, this is something we genuinely believe in, and it's because it's being led from the top.
Mm-hmm.
And then we know where our part to play is within that. And then you empower people, right, to make the most of that.
Yeah. And that idea of almost, you're right about the semantics of the word ownership, because there's something about, well, if someone else owns something, then it's not mine.
Right.
They possess it. I don't. We hear terms like champion a lot. And I think there's a lot of value in that word as well, kind of describing the scenario where you've got that there's someone there that's pushing the agenda forward, bringing CX to mind, and driving things forward, championing it. But it's not such a scenario where it's like, well, that group does CX, not my group. And I think there's definitely something to there in that. Well, let's do something kind of pivoting here. Let's pivot to travel, because you said something interesting to me when we talked earlier. Your quote was, "I like being a tourist, but I don't like tourists." Well, it got a chuckle out of me the first time, but unpack that for me. What do you mean by that?
Oh, that sounds so terrible. My own words played back at me in that way. It's a slightly flippant, slightly throwaway comment, but there is a sort of genuine piece to it for me. Travel is really important to me. It's my kind of big goal of unwinding. It's what I look forward to, having these marker moments where I'm going to go and have these wonderful experiences. And I think travel is so much about the experience that if I go somewhere and what I get is the tourist experience, I will feel like I've missed out on something, whether that be culture, the real people, the food, whatever it may be. And so I've got this thing in my head. It's like, oh no, I don't want to just be ending up amongst a whole bunch of tourists. But obviously, realistically, you are always a tourist.
Right.
And so it wasn't meant to be sort of derogatory. I think everybody feels some of that. But I think, it's about my personal experience of traveling and wanting to try and get as far under the skin of that as I can. Now, if you're going for a week, a weekend, 2 weeks, sometimes that's quite tricky to do. But as long as you feel that you've had some enrichment from the experience that's different from the norm, I think for me that feels less touristy. So it's a bit of a flippant throwaway comment, but there is something to it in terms of sucking the marrow out of that experience.
There's a gentleman that's going to be, his episode will release actually after you and I have recorded this, but it will be before your episode releases. Dr. Tom DeWitt. And he and I had a conversation about just this, right? And it was this idea. He has spent a lot of time traveling where he immerses. And I mean, he gets deep into and lives in the culture for months on end, even talking about, I had a haircut in a new country each time so that I could experience what a haircut was like, because we don't think about haircuts as tourists, those kind of things. No. And he talked about the richness that you gain from that. I've got to imagine that, and we will, I'm saving this for later, but I know you've got a pretty deep travel experience. But in general, how do you find that depth when you don't get to have the long-term engagement that you're talking about there, right? If you're not traveling for months on end, how do you be a tourist but not be a tourist?
That is a difficult one to answer in sense, but I guess because I kind of have these as big signpost moments that I'm not having them every 6 months or every year even. It's not possible. I do quite a bit of research before I go. So, and I think being able to get hold of or find somebody local who can help kind of guide you a little bit is always useful. And again, going beyond the kind of the normal tourist activities, people who can show you a little bit of the real place. So even when I've had kind of tour guides, we did some market tours in Thailand, for example, and we had a tour guide because otherwise we'd have been horribly lost and bad things may have happened. But we were able to have that dialogue over sort of, coffee or something, that they suddenly realize, oh, maybe these people would be more interested in going here than here. And you almost ask the questions, just be a bit forward, not just to be passive, but say, what I'd really like to do is I'd really like to understand, where a great dish is made, or where a great kind of experience is had, or something that you might not see everybody. I know it sort of sounds a bit, but I think it is just taking a bit of positive charge for what you want to do and see, but in an empathic way or empathetic way, rather than, ordering people to take you somewhere interesting. But I think if you express that interest in somebody else's culture and somebody else's place of being, then you connect better, and they want to show off those great things.
So a little change of pace here with those kind of travels. You mentioned Bangkok, around the world for you and for me both. Sometimes we need a little break. So join me here in the first class lounge. We'll move quickly here, hopefully have some fun. What is a dream travel location from your past?
I really enjoyed it. The Maldives for me was a big one, because I got some relaxation, but there was a lot of sailing and a lot of water-based events to do. So got a little bit of action in there as well as a bit of rest. So.
The Maldives is definitely on my future, to know that it was part of your past. There's a lot of envy starting to ooze from me right now. So
I was very fortunate at the time to be able to go.
I subscribe to a lot of travel points blogs and the like, and trying to figure out how to get myself to the Maldives. So what is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
I'd really like to go to Japan again, because it's so different culturally to kind of what I'm used to. And everybody I know who's been has been really positive about that and saying, I know you'd love it. So that's a big one. I was always like to do a bit more of Southeast Asia as well. I've done little bits of that, but that's another one I'd love to do more of.
Get yourself there on the Eastern Hemisphere. It sounds wonderful. I've done some traveling in Southeast Asia, but never Japan. It is definitely on the list. I've got a son in university who is quite interested in studying abroad there, and I kind of hope he does, because I would be more than happy to visit him from time to time.
A slightly better college trip.
What is a favorite thing to eat?
Thai cuisine is my favorite kind of overall food stuff, but if I had to pick one item, bit left at home, pizza fits all time zones, right? Pizza is the stuff of life. It may be executive cheese on toast, but pizza is wonderful.
That is very true. Well, on the flip side, what is a thing your parents forced you to eat, but you hated as a kid?
I come from an Italian family. My grandmother's Italian. We used to eat all sorts of weird things. But mainly vegetables would be things that my parents would have to force me to eat. I like them now, but as a kid, not so keen on some of the weirder ones. And we had a household where you weren't allowed to leave the table unless you'd finished everything on your plate.
Yeah. Definitely been there. Oh my goodness. Well, thankfully now as adults we can choose what to eat, but a lot of times we do pivot to the more healthy. That sometimes it would be better if we had some of that wisdom as a kid, right? So what is one travel item, and not including your phone, of course, that you will not leave home without?
Oh, that's interesting, especially now you've ruled out phone. I think something I did used to have in my wallet, which was sort of a bit of tongue-in-cheek, but also there's a truth to it. So I used to have a dollar bill in there. Because my theory was, so many countries around the world, I could trade that for a phone call if I was ever in trouble. A pound, just you can't do that. So, and also, helpfully, I love American money. It just has a really interesting kind of old school feel to it. We've lost here because ours is now plastic.
Let's go back a bit. Thinking back to that CX ownership discussion, knowing that it should be everywhere in a company. And this is a kind of a cultural question. Maybe it's a tactical one, but how do you bring customer awareness to people in a company who just simply might not think they actually are customer facing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to this one. I think, again, leaning on that culture, as I have done a few times, I think if you've got the values in place that highlight how important customers are to your organization, and you're sort of living and breathing those every day, and you're communicating with everybody in your company, and you make sure that your employee experience is exactly the same. So customers are as important to everybody, and that you make it very clear that even if you're making decisions that don't seem like they might be customer facing, they may have implications and impacts on your customers. And so you're making sure that in all thinking, the customer is always represented.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think people just become used to it. It will be odd for some to begin with, where they come from a company or an organization where they're new, who haven't been there. But, people are adaptable and they kind of learn from the culture of an organization. So if you have that in place and you treat everybody the same, so you almost break apart customer facing and not customer facing as titles, if you will.
Right.
And say everybody's responsible for the customer to a greater or lesser extent. You all have a role to play. These are our values of what's important to us, that we are looking at making all experiences as good as they can possibly be. I think that's the sort of start point for it. And then I think it's about how you communicate your strategy, your plans, and your achievements. So make sure everybody is sharing, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, these are the results, here's what customers are telling us as to why this is important.
That latter
Just don't
part.
leave anybody out.
Yeah. Well, and that latter part is one that I find so impactful, is here's what our customers are saying. I have been a part of so many conversations where I might feel it. And, as a consultant or even as an employee, when I've been inside of clients or my own companies that I've worked for in the past, and I might have a strong opinion about this is the way it should be or shouldn't be. But then when it is the customer that says it, it is amazing how much more impact that has on what the company feels or how decisions get made. So exactly that, bringing that voice of the customer is something I love that you closed there with that one. That's so absolutely vital.
I think it's also remembering that whilst the people who are working in your organization, their job might not feel like it's directly customer facing, they go outside the business and talk to people who might be customers. They go and represent that business elsewhere. So having that kind of customer thinking and that ability to be able to talk about that and show the empathy again and really kind of understand the customer vision of the company, that's going to transfer, that's going to translate in conversations. I'm not saying everybody goes around and talks about this to all their friends, but it'll come up.
No, well, you mentioned something in that kind of describing how to bring that customer awareness. And it was talking about, what are we measuring? What are we be able to talk about the stories or the impact and the results and that sort of stuff. And you said something to me earlier that I'd love for you to unpack. And it is, I don't care what you measure as long as it results in customer impact. You've got great phrases, man. So I just want you to explore that one a bit. Unpack that one for me.
Thank you again for picking a topic that's going to get me into all sorts of bother. I think what's really interesting as customer experience professionals is, because there isn't really a one governing body or one approach that is the perfect way of doing something, you can get lost in a world of measuring things. Someone once said to me, what gets measured gets done. That's not actually been my experience. I think, you can talk about NPS, pros and cons. You can talk about CSAT, pros and cons. You can talk about effort. All measures have some good points and bad points. I think it's about identifying which one is going to help you have the biggest impact positively for customers.
Yeah.
And how do you get to action? Because that's the only way anything changes.
That right there sings my song. And, you said the word action. Absolutely. Right. It is. And I definitely cut you off, but it's just because I'm so excited to hear, yes, action. I don't care what your score is. Don't put it on a board. Don't put it on a wall. Just do something with it.
Yeah, by all means, be proud. And if you've made improvements, do sing about it. But that isn't the end. To be honest, the end is closing that loop with your customers, is saying, listen, we've heard you, we've done something, this is what we've done. This is how we use your information, your feedback, your voice to make improvements for you, because that is so powerful. It keeps people giving you feedback for a start, and they don't understand in general, customers, what does NPS mean? To them, nothing.
Right.
But hey, I come here now and my experience has gotten better. This is something I look forward to doing, or I go away and think, wow, that's made my day a bit better. A fantastic thing to actually do.
You're hitting on, it's funny, the timeliness of when we're recording this. We didn't set this up. We didn't coordinate this, but Jeremy Watkin put out the CX question of the day on Twitter yesterday. And it was about what are survey practices that you hate and which would change. And a recurring theme in the responses on that was, I don't want a survey where somebody doesn't do anything with the information. So your closed loop feedback, your action, your improvement, all of those are so important to overall customer experience, but just not having your customers go insane or want to torch and pitchfork your company.
the whole value of surveys is something that's come up out of this. For me, that's where that's come from, is that people don't mind filling in a bit of a longer survey. If A, you're asking me questions that matter to me and are about me and my experience, and B, I know you're going to do something with it, not just put a score on the end of it. I'm happy to leave you reviews. I'm happy to give you positive and constructive feedback, because people do want to buy into the experiences they have. Maybe not for every product they buy, but if you have a choice between two things and price is pretty similar and one offers you a great experience and the other doesn't care, most people are going to make a pretty easy choice there.
Yeah, I think we've seen plenty of examples out there. I start to think about airlines and travel and hospitality, but we're not going to go there. Not going to go there because we're starting to run out of time. I could definitely talk to you a long time about survey practices and really just voice of the customer in general. But let's close out with a conversation going back to the globe. You lived in India for 9 months. That had to be fascinating to be a traveler, but a long-term one, able to truly steep in the experience and culture. I'm probably going to just fold my arms, lean back in my chair, and I just want to hear you tell stories. Tell me about those 9 months in India.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. The company that I was working for at the time was creating a kind of research hub in Bangalore in India, and wanted somebody to go out there and do some training and to help set up that. And it was one of those where there was no way in which I was going to say no to that.
Right.
that was going to combine a number of things that I'm passionate about. One, the kind of research, teaching, methodologies, learning, helping people grow. And two, a whole new experience that was going to be nothing like my life at home. And I got exactly what I bargained for in a really positive way. It was, I was welcomed into a culture that has so many rich qualities to it in terms of sights and sounds and colors and smells, and brings all your senses to life. So really good on the experience front.
Right.
But it was kind, it was welcoming, it was friendly, it was really positive, and supportive. And the more that I tried to immerse myself into the culture, the more that happened. The more people warmed, the more people wanted to show me their life. And because I was showing a genuine interest,
right,
I got to see things I might not otherwise get to see. I was invited to weddings of people I barely met.
Wow.
I got to go, and people wanted to sort of introduce me to their families. And it wasn't just because I was an exotic stranger from somewhere else.
Right.
Because there were more people doing this, and lots of companies who were sending people over. I guess the difference was that I was there saying, show me more, show me more.
Wow.
And you do have to, go a bit of rough with the smooth. Not every place you get to sleep is as comfortable as
very true.
A 5-star hotel.
Right.
And I think what's really fascinating with it is it really helped me to understand myself better, and particularly about communicating with people across borders and chipping away at some of the kind of assumptions you have in your head about the world. The more I get to see it, the more that happens. It's fascinating that as an English-speaking society, we built a lot of the world around being able to speak English back to us. And I go somewhere and they can speak the language almost as well, if not better than me and some of my friends and colleagues. And you think, wow, why is that? How has that come to be?
Yeah.
It was such a great experience. It was one of the best of my lifetime, and has helped me to kind of think about what do I want to get from other travel experiences as well. So that sort of helped me cement my whole, do you know what? I don't have to go for a beach holiday every year. I'd rather save up every 2 or 3 years, try and get an extra bit of time out of it, and go to places that I'm going to find something different. It's set up a few different things that I've done since then that have been really positive experiences.
Yeah, what a great approach. And I can even hear, as I think through the conversation that we had, you talked about going deep and listening, and almost, you didn't say it in this, but almost being empathetic to the culture in which you're traveling. And I can see how that not only influenced your ability to absorb and get into that culture and that travel experience and then influence future ones, but it clearly has influenced your approach to customer experience and how you go into the business space and all of the like. And I have certainly found that travel presents that same kind of influence to me and how it influences how I go about business. So Damian, it is a brilliant story to hear. Let me ask you this, because we have come to close at the end of our time here. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you and your approaches? And just get to know you? Okay,
well, they can go visit my website, which is www.intelligentpurpose.com, or they can email me, which is Damian@intelligentpurpose.com, and that's DAMIAN. Or if they're really exciting, they can go onto LinkedIn and they'll find me on there.
Well, I'm proof positive that is a path that is one that can be met with a connection and the chance to get deeper in the conversation. I will put all of that into the show notes so folks you can see that and see that there. Damian, it has been a brilliant conversation. I love talking to someone who has that heart for customer experience, and I especially love that someone has that heart for customer experience that is likely influenced by their global travels, as that is certainly an area of interest of mine expressed over travels and these episodes and the like. But it has been a wonderful conversation, Damian. I appreciate you taking the time to stop down and have a good conversation with us here on CX Passport. I wish you the best and the rest of your day, and hopefully you get out there on the road soon.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's been a great experience.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX for CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX for CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer, every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.